Picture yourself as a crusader, a volunteer who has taken up arms to fight for God, specifically to recapture the most holy city in the world, Jerusalem. You and 20,000 others are going to fight for the same thing. But not long into the journey, this massive army is running out of money. Your leaders can't afford to pay for the ships that will help you sail to the Middle East. And before you know it, your leaders have decided to sack a Christian city, your own religious brothers, for loot. When the Pope hears of this, he excommunicates those responsible. The crusade has ended before it begins. Or rather, that's what should have happened. Your leaders continue to push forward, regardless of the Pope's demands, and soon you arrive at the greatest Christian city on the planet, Constantinople. It seems unthinkable, but eventually this city will become the host to another mass slaying of your own brothers, in what will become history's worst friendly fire incident. Hello and welcome to episode 13 of History's worst friendly fire incident. My name is Peter.
And I'm Alex, and we have got a genuine historical tragedy for you today. A terrible event, an event which contemporaries were horrified by, and that, well, you were saying just before we came on air, Peter, that when you were doing your background research for this episode, you just couldn't believe some of the things you were reading.
Yeah, it's like a bunch of mishaps after another, which makes it proper history's most stuff.
Absolutely.
But the level of incompetence and the level of just bizarreness to the whole story, it's crazy. So, history's worst friendly fire incident. The Fourth Crusade.
The Fourth Crusade, yeah. Probably the listeners might not have been expecting that.
Yeah, we're going back to the Crusades, although this one is going to take place. How many years after the First Crusade? What about 100?
About 105,
Yeah.
110, around that ballpark. So not that long in the grand scheme of history. And what we're going to do is, I think, probably to some extent build on the story we told about the First Crusade. Was it episode 4?
I think so, yeah.
Which is a great story. You should really go back and listen to it. It is a kind of perfect, almost like it's been written, 3-act drama. But a lot of that sets up some of the context for this one.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's start with the beginnings of the Fourth Crusade. Why do they decide to have a Fourth Crusade?
Right. Well, if you kind of listen to the episode 4 about the First Crusade, we went into detail about what a crusade was, why people went on crusade, and we told them the story, and the story ends miraculously, pardon the pun, with success. The Crusaders, having been summoned out to the east by the Byzantine Empire, the continuation of the Roman Empire in the east, a Greek-speaking state in Asia Minor, Greece, the Near East. They go out there, they defeat the Seljuk Turks, they capture key cities, Antioch, and of course Jerusalem, the most holy city in Christianity. And they then set up what are called, the term's not a particularly good term, but we're going to use it in the episode, Crusader States. There was 4 Crusader States: the County of Edessa, County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, set up by these kind of French knights who had gone out on the First Crusade. and managed to carve out their own little principalities and kingdoms in the Near East.
Hmm.
Now, unsurprisingly, it was quite tough for them out there. They were
Yeah.
cut off, from the rest of the Western world. They faced, a lot of challenges from the Muslim Arabs, and there'd been a second crusade in the 1140s because the county of Edessa had fallen to the Arabs. It had failed. There had been a third crusade in the late 1180s, early 1190s, which is probably the stereotypical image of crusades that exists, I'd say, in popular culture. Because what happened was in 1187, Jerusalem itself fell.
Okay.
After nearly 100 years of Latin Christian rule. It fell to the Muslim warlord Saladin, and a number of kings of Europe travelled to try and recover it, including Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, also the King of France, the Holy Roman Emperor of Germany as well. So a big international kind of coalition. They had basically fought Saladin to a standstill. It ended in stalemate, and they hadn't recovered Jerusalem. So there was kind of unfinished business.
Right. And this is where the Fourth Crusade comes in.
Exactly. In 1198, so just a few years after the end of the Third Crusade, Pope Innocent the Third announced a new call to crusade, the same objective, to recover Jerusalem. Now, for a number of reasons, it was quite slow in getting off the ground. There was numerous wars going on in Europe at that time, so we didn't have any kings or emperors of Western Europe joining in. You had this evangelist called Fulk who went around recruiting, preaching, and apparently by 1201 he claimed to have signed up 200,000 people to the crusade. He later was disgraced with embezzlement charges because a lot of the fundraising they were doing, apparently, he was pocketing.
Oh, nice. That's good.
So this crusade, Innocent the Third, the Pope is trying to put together, is quite slow to get off the ground. And there's also the problem of the fact that out in the Holy Land itself, in Palestine, the Crusader States and Westerners who were out helping them during the 1190s agreed like a truce with the Arabs. So a massive crusade arriving would obviously
throw that off.
Truce.
Yeah.
So it was increasingly kind of thought, Richard the Lionheart had really deduced this in the early 1190s, that it was going to be impossible to capture Jerusalem unless you broke the Arab Caliphate in Egypt, which was at that time the kind of most powerful power in the region. So you couldn't take Jerusalem and you couldn't hold Jerusalem unless you took down or, really crippled the caliphate in Egypt. So this crusade was slow to get off the ground, and it differed from the others in that it was thinking about, well, we're going to attack Egypt in order to facilitate a capture of Jerusalem.
So, tactically, sound, I guess. Is that? Well, things don't always go as planned.
No, not quite. I mean, there's lots of stages of this not going to plan, it must be said. But like you say, the vision, the strategic vision behind it was not unsensible. Is that even a word? I don't know. It was not sensible. It was a good idea, is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of later crusades picked up on this idea that you've got to attack Egypt. Now, what happened was, crusading had been going on for about 100 years, and it wasn't just big crusades that went out, the numbered ones, but different parties, different individuals, different groups would go out to the Holy Land to fight the good fight.
Yeah.
So this was a well-trodden path by now. And when we learnt the story of the First Crusade, it was this epic 2,000, 3,000 mile march across the continent of Europe and then through Asia Minor and the Holy Land. Well, this had become much more common it had become much more common to sail to the Holy Land because that's just easier.
Probably more effective, yeah.
Makes more sense, doesn't it? So for a big expedition to Egypt, they were going to need a big fleet. And in 1201, a treaty was signed between the Crusade leadership, which was mostly French nobles. Like I said, no major kings of Europe got involved with the Fourth Crusade, perhaps because they'd been such, at this point, only 10 years before, there'd been a massive crusade, the Third Crusade. So these noblemen had come and they'd signed a treaty with Venice. Now, Venice was an Italian city-state. It was a merchant republic. It was, it was somewhere that would have lots of ships and Mediterranean know-how. So it seemed like a sensible plan.
Yeah.
Except there was a problem. Christopher Timon, an excellent historian of the Crusades, calls the Treaty of Venice possibly the most famous and notorious transport contract in European history.
Okay.
It's worth delving into the details of this treaty because the treaty and basically money become the leading drivers of the decision-making of this crusade, which is to go in various strange directions.
Yeah, it's a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Yeah. So the treaty said that Venice agreed that they were going to transport 33,500 men and 4,500 horses to Egypt. And they agreed to do this at a cost of 85,000 marks. Marks was a currency at the time, usually a gold and silver coin. It's a lot of money. It's very difficult to say what that conversion would be, but it's a heck of a lot of money. Now, the Venetians asked for payments in installments because they'd have to get to work right away building a massive fleet to carry 33,000 men, 4,500 horses. The crew for those ships would likely have been as many as 30,000 as well, so they need to recruit and, train these crew. So the Crusade leaders, for the first installment, literally had to borrow 5,000 marks to give the Doge of Venice, a guy called Dandolo, up front. And they kind of worked out a formula, which would be that, each Crusader would come and they would pay 2 marks towards as a contribution, and each horse, the owner of the horse, would pay 4 marks as a contribution. The Crusader leaders, I'm sure, realised that they would have to foot a significant chunk of that bill and subsidise it, but it depended on, and here's the crux, it depended on 33,500 people turning up.
Okay.
Because they would need to pay their fees, otherwise the sums just wouldn't add up.
Yeah.
So they signed this deal in the summer of 1201, and the agreement was the crusade would muster at Venice in the summer of 1202, by which time the fleet would be built, everyone would turn up, pay, and they could go to Egypt. Right, now things begin to go wrong.
Okay.
So first of all, the guy who was leading the crusade leadership, a French count, Theobald of Champagne, dies. So the main guy saying that signed the treaty on the Crusaders' behalf is dead, and he's replaced by a guy called Boniface of Montferrat, an Italian nobleman, very, very wealthy, but perhaps quite a controversial figure in this crusade. He's of good crusading pedigree, as were a lot of the leading nobles. You had Louis of Blois, Baldwin of Flanders. I think in our first crusade story we had people of Blois and of Flanders. These were their descendants. Simon de Montfort, Geoffrey of Villehardouin, both of whom themselves had already campaigned in the Holy Land before. So even though there's no big leaders of Europe, there is plenty of mainly French nobles of crusading kind of pedigree. So then we get to the summer of 1202, but only about a third of the projected crusaders actually turn up.
Oh dear.
So Fulk saying he'd signed up 200,000 clearly wasn't true.
Yeah.
So the best modern estimate, probably about 12,000. An army of 12,000 assembled at Venice in the summer of 1202. Now that's still a big army by contemporary standards.
Yeah, it's just not the size that was promised.
Exactly.
And they're not going to be able to pay the price.
Exactly. So this bill of 85,000 marks, they're not going to be able to pay it because each was only going to pay 2 marks per person. And so they spend the summer desperately trying to work out how they can afford this, how they can meet their contract with the Venetians. And the Venetians, by the way, can't really back down from this because, well, they've been building these ships for a year.
Yeah.
That's highly expensive. But also, the Doge had invested a lot of political capital as well in carrying out a crusade. He can't exactly, say, right, I'm going to,
You can't stay here. You can't, launch from here because, you've already made agreements.
You've agreed to ship them to Egypt, and not just for any reason, but for a crusade to save the Holy Land. So the Doge can't just go back on it either. He's got to still try and make this work as well, or else it's going to be highly embarrassing for him. So the summer is spent with the Crusaders desperately trying to, get together the cash. They basically eventually come to this rule where each man, and as we kind of said in our original Crusade episode, the people who go on crusade, yes, the leadership are nobility, but there'd be a lot of ordinary people coming along as well, or a lot of the retinues of these knights and nobles being brought along. So everyone was basically encouraged to pay what you can over the 2 marks that you have to pay.
Right.
A lot of the leadership have to hand over a huge portion of their fortune, of their movable goods. And even then, their best efforts result in them raising a figure that was 34,000 marks short. So that's about 40% short. So
not great.
They're a long way short, and they've impoverished themselves. A lot of ordinary crusaders especially barely had enough cash left now to survive. They still have to buy food and everything. So they're in a very parlous financial position.
So how do they continue?
Yeah, I mean, that could have been the end of the crusade, and in many ways it should have been.
Yeah. Probably would have been for the best.
It probably would have been for the best. But like I said, for all the parties, they all want this to work. The people who've come and signed up for the crusade have made a huge personal and financial sacrifice to do so. They still want to go on crusade. And the Venetians, exactly the same. So in September of 1202, with this army sitting around waiting and the bill unpaid, the Doge makes a suggestion. He says, well, your remaining debt can be paid from the booty, from the proceeds of our future conquests in Egypt.
Oh, okay.
We'll not demand the rest of the payment now. We'll let you pay once we get there.
That's a very interesting plan, and is it smart? Will it work?
Well, the Doge wasn't going to be just that generous, because what if the crusade didn't succeed, right?
Yeah.
So he said, I'll let you pay once we get there if you agree to attack a Christian port in the Adriatic Sea called Zara.
Right. So these are Christians attacking Christians. What?
Not just Christians attacking Christians, a crusade
Yeah.
attacking Christians.
Yeah. So
and not heretical Christians,
No.
not Christians of some. These were Catholics, Latin Western Christians.
I mean, it's a bit of a bold move, I'd say, just to get some booty. But do they go with it? Well, what's the general idea? What's the general feeling of attacking your own, people of your own faith, to essentially get money?
Well, yeah, this was supposed to be a holy war, a crusade. They'd sworn an oath to carry it out, so it was obviously very controversial. Zara was like a semi-independent city-state that was formerly a vassal under the protection of the King of Hungary, who was a Christian, was a Catholic. And actually, the King of Hungary at that time was kind of sort of on crusade himself, fighting against the Serbs at the behest of the Pope. So anyone on crusade, their property is actually legally protected by the church.
Right.
You can't, if these nobles going out for several years on crusade, their neighbors can't seize their lands. It's very much, not allowed under church kind of law. So they were kind of breaking so many aspects of the crusade here, and Pope Innocent actually forbid them to attack Zara. But in October of 1202, they set sail, and in November, they seize the city and hand it over to the Venetians.
Wow.
The Venetians, by the way, had ruled Zara in the past, and this was all really about self-interest.
Yeah.
Because they were a trading power, and they, had different colonies and bases established around the Mediterranean. So it was clearly motivated by very much temporal, worldly concerns.
Yeah.
Not any religious kind of zeal. Now, the Pope was very unhappy. He actually excommunicated, kicked out of the church, the Crusaders and the Venetians for this. And there was a lot of discord within the Crusader camp. One of the nobles I mentioned, Simon of Montfort, declared, "I have not come here to destroy Christians," and he actually refused to take part in the attack. The following spring, he left with a large number of sympathizers. So the winter of 1202-3, the crusade is based at Zara, and it's a pretty dark time. There's riots, the Crusaders are unhappy, there's clashes with Venetians, there's defections of people either going home or making their own way to the Holy Land. But it's dangerous. One ship that actually leaves Zara with 500 defectors gets shipwrecked with no survivors. So most of the Crusaders are kind of basically stranded here.
Yeah.
They're stranded at Zara. The Venetians control the ships. Money is still the big issue. More power is therefore in the hands of the very rich Crusade leadership, particularly Boniface himself, who was one of the richest nobles of Europe. Baldwin of Flanders, who you could very much say the same thing. So they're very much reliant, the mass of the Crusader army is reliant on these guys and the Venetians just to survive and have any chance of getting to Egypt.
Yeah, I'm curious about, because the Pope has excommunicated these guys, and from what it feels like, this is still going on. I would expect, a lot more people to kind of say, "Oh, well, it's time to go home."
Well, funnily enough, the Crusade High Command, what they did was they suppressed that papal
bull. Okay, the old classic. Yeah, okay. All right, that makes more sense then.
they didn't let the army know that this had happened, and actually over the winter, the Pope agreed to basically forgive the Crusaders, allowed them to show penitence for what they'd done at Zara.
Oh.
Basically because he was trying to salvage something from this crusade.
Yeah.
You know, for the Pope, this is a big personal project. And it would be very embarrassing if it all just ended in disaster. He still wants it to succeed. So he interestingly, by the way, Pope Innocent didn't forgive the Venetians.
Oh.
And he sent a letter to them, to the Crusaders in January 1203, saying, "You mustn't violate any more Christian lands unless they wickedly impede your journey or another just or necessary cause, but you've got to seek my permission to make sure it is a just or necessary cause.
Okay.
You don't get to decide that." Now, Christopher Tyman suspects that actually what Innocent had in mind was maybe some sort of, the Venetians basically being these wicked Christians who are impeding the journey.
Mm.
So he left that little glint for them. Now, something else very important happens in the winter of 1202-3 as the Crusaders are sat in Zara. And that is they receive in late December a delegation from a guy called Alexios Angelos, who was a Byzantine prince. Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire being, like I said, the Eastern Roman Empire, Greek-speaking, that still existed in modern-day Greece, Balkans, and parts of Asia Minor. Now, to understand this delegation, we're going to have to dive back into Byzantine history a little bit. We're going to have to kind of pause, leave the Crusaders stranded at Zara, and kind of think, right, what was this delegation all about?
Right.
So, when we told the story of the First Crusade, the Byzantine Empire was really central to it. They went out to help the Byzantines. A lot of the crusade up to the Siege of Antioch was done in collaboration with the Byzantines. And it all really started with the appeal of the Byzantine Emperor Alexius the First, Alexius Komnenos, to help him fight the Muslims.
Yeah. So crusading in the Byzantine Empire has a lot of history, and kind of tied in there.
Now, Alexius I Komnenos was a great emperor. He ruled from 1081 to 1118, and he really helped the Byzantine Empire recover from the previous century, the 11th century, where it had seen a huge amount of civil war, different aristocrats trying to seize power. He had really secured the empire firmly under his dynasty, the Komnenian dynasty. But the interesting thing is the way that he did it. He fundamentally changed the structure of the Byzantine Empire from being quite a kind of bureaucratic, almost modern state in the sense of it wasn't tied to a family. But that was kind of why you had a lot of aristocrats trying to seize power. To being one where it was very much a dynastic family-based regime. Paul Magdaleno says that, Alexius I, what he did is he founded a dynastic regime where imperial status didn't just pass vertically down from generation to generation, from father to son, but it extended laterally to his whole kin and to the families that they married into. So Alexios used his family members to staff all the top positions of the state, to govern parts of the empire for him, to lead the army, which hadn't been something that was done before. It was more like the Roman Empire in the sense it was bureaucratic. The positions were not family positions.
Yeah.
So you got emerging over the course of the 12th century, the 1100s, this aristocracy of the wider Komnenos clan, who filled all the important positions of state, who had vast wealth, who controlled the army, whose power rested on their dynastic, kinship to the emperor and to hereditary titles, which is probably more like Western kingdoms were, in medieval times, where it was all about kind of the family. Now, this ensured stability in the short term, but there was a problem in the long term. The Emperor Manuel I, who was the grandson of Alexius I, died in 1180, and he left an 11-year-old son on the throne, Alexios the Second. Now, in the past, when there'd been a child emperor or a weak emperor, often a general, an aristocratic general, would have seized power. That happened quite a lot, for example, in the 10th century. But he would have kept the child of the proper dynasty there as a co-emperor, as the kind of legitimacy, because the general has no legitimacy of himself. The trouble is, the aristocracy is now full of people related to the emperor and to the imperial family. So you've got this huge family of very powerful people in top positions of state or in top positions in the army who, when they overthrow power, are going to claim it for themselves because they've got a legitimate tie to the throne.
All right.
And that's exactly what happened. This child emperor was overthrown in 1183 by Manuel's cousin, a guy called Andronikos I. But Andronikos I, because he was a komnenos, thought he could just be emperor in his own right, so he poisoned and murdered his own cousin's son, the young child Alexios. So people didn't like Andronicus, and there was a popular uprising, and he was overthrown, and he was lynched in 1185. And at the head of this popular uprising was a guy called Isaac the Second Angelos. I realise this is getting complicated here. You should perhaps look up a family tree.
Yeah.
But Isaac himself, even though he'd come to power through a popular uprising, was related to the Komnenos clan. He was the great grandson of Alexius the First. So he claimed, to be a legitimate emperor. So it meant the whole Angelos clan claimed to have imperial legitimacy. So then 10 years later, in 1195, his older brother, proclaimed himself emperor while Isaac was out hunting. When his brother returned, he was blinded and imprisoned.
Wow.
So the Byzantine Empire, this dynastic family-based system, has descended into chaos, and it is an empire that is increasingly fracturing. Richard the Lionheart, when he was on the Third Crusade, actually seized Cyprus, which was a Byzantine territory, with the excuse that it was basically revolting against the emperor at exactly kind of this time, where in the center of the empire, the capital Constantinople, there was so much chaos. All parts of the empire were fragmenting on the periphery, like Cyprus. Serbia and Bulgaria had both broken away. So it was an empire that was suffering a lot of instability. Right.
back to the
Back to Zara.
The Zara.
Winter of 1223. The Byzantine emperor is a guy called Alexios the Third. Now remember, he had blinded and imprisoned his own brother Isaac.
Right.
Isaac's son was also called Alexios.
Oh, that's some more confusing.
Okay. So we've got this rogue Alexios who escaped Constantinople in 1201, and he's actually been roving around the West, hawking, his claim to the throne, asking different Westerners to back him and kind of help him, give him the military might to stage a coup and kind of see what's rightfully his, what his father would have granted to him, what his uncle has unfairly taken away.
Yeah.
So this young Alexios, he's 21. He's even gone to see the Pope. The Pope hasn't supported him. But he's settled down in the court of a South German leader called Philip of Swabia,
Hmm.
because Philip of Swabia happened to be his brother-in-law.
Oh, that's convenient.
Now, Philip of Swabia was related to Boniface, the leader of the Crusade. So, as the Crusaders are sitting about doing nothing in the winter of 1202-3, a delegation from Philip and this young Alexios arrive.
Right. This is the opportunity.
What do you think they were asking?
Well, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Maybe, we help each other out, and I can get you to Jerusalem if you help me restore my father to the throne.
Right. You have a great big army sat about, not sure what to do, that has run and not got any money. And I think Philip and Alexios saw this as a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And they make an offer which is very cleverly, I would say, targeted at Crusader sensibilities.
Hmm.
So they say, right, Crusaders, come to Constantinople, put me on the throne, restore the legitimate line of the Angelos dynasty, and we will unite the Greek and Catholic churches, the Greek Orthodox and the Latin Catholic Church.
Hmm.
We will give you 200,000 marks, which would be more than enough to settle the debts. We would provide provisions for your army, food and supplies. We would provide an additional 10,000 men from the Byzantine army to join you on your great expedition. And we would finance a permanent garrison in the Holy Land of 500 knights.
Okay, so from the Crusader perspective, this is pretty hard to pass up. I mean, everything seems all above board, right?
It's an amazing, amazing offer to the Crusade leadership. And the Venetians probably realized some of those promises were a bit unrealistic. They had a much better understanding of the Byzantine Empire. They had trading bases throughout the empire and in Constantinople. But to them, this probably looks like a pretty good opportunity as well. There's money in it. There's probably a lot of power in it. So the Crusade leadership thinks, yeah. And remember that letter I mentioned from Pope Innocent?
Yeah,
that said you can't attack Christians unless there's a just or necessary cause.
But they need to go back and ask him. And I just am interested to see how the Pope would hear, hey, can we attack our essentially our Christian brothers,
and the biggest Christian power in the Near East.
Yeah, can we go do that so that we can get the rest of the crusade going? I'm curious. How does the Pope respond?
Well, they didn't ask the Pope.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well,
that's simple. That just makes everything so much easier. Just go for it.
Again, that probably should have been the end of it, shouldn't it? But I think the Crusade leaders realized what the reaction of the Pope would be, and when the Pope hears that they are setting sail for Constantinople, he very clearly writes them to say, no, you cannot do this. You're in no position to judge the rights or wrongs of the sitting Emperor Alexios the Third, and whether or not he should be deposed. Now, for the Crusaders, I think they would have justified it in their own minds as, look, we are going to unite Christianity, and we're going to benefit the Holy Land. We're going to massively boost our expedition to Egypt. This is a win-win-win-win.
Yeah. There's literally no downside.
On the other hand, a lot of the Crusade rank and file, according to the best contemporary source, about half the army were very, very uncomfortable with the decision to support Alexios the Younger, who would come to be Alexios the Fourth, in his basically coup attempt. And not only that, but when they stopped off at the Greek island of Corfu and kind of prepared to sail to Constantinople, the local populace made it very clear that they did not support this usurpation attempt of their ruler.
Yeah.
So certainly, again, a lot of defections at this point. A lot of people leave. So it means that crusading army is probably now about half and half Crusaders and Venetians. But nevertheless, they set sail for Constantinople, and they arrive there at 1203.
Right.
June of 1203. Now, it's worth setting the scene of Constantinople. It is the greatest city at that time of the Christian world.
Mm.
It was built by the Emperor Constantine in the 300s, so it's a 900-year-old city by this point. It's got some of the greatest artifacts and relics of both Christianity and of the kind of ancient classical world of the Greek and Roman worlds, because as the capital of the late Roman Empire, a lot of these great antique, artifacts of antiquity were moved there. But also, it is the most formidably defended city possibly in the world at that time. It had never up to that point been conquered by a foreign power in its 900-year history. It had triple walls on the land side, but I would advise you to look up a map of medieval Constantinople, because great strength is that it's surrounded by sea on 3 of its sides. It's on a narrow peninsula.
Yeah.
So it's got huge Roman walls on its land side, and on the other 3 sides, it's the sea, and it has sea walls. So it's incredibly well defended. Now, they parade this young Alexios in front of the walls, and the residents apparently didn't know who he was. So this guy, they're saying, this is your rightful emperor. Who? And it was very clear that Alexios the Third wasn't going to just open the gates and let the Crusaders in.
Yeah.
So now you have a situation where the crusading army is besieging probably the greatest city in Christendom.
That's a weird thing to say.
Yeah, to say the least.
How big is the Crusader army at this point in time?
We don't really know how many have left, but given the initial figure was 12,000, plus the Venetians, it was probably over 20,000. We're thinking, maybe half have left, so maybe we're down to something like 10,000.
Right.
10 to 15,000 ballpark, I would say.
To siege all of Constantinople with 10,000 men, that's kind of impressive, I guess.
It's still a tough ask, but it's a big army. It's certainly more than the Byzantines had there. And because of the kind of chaos I've described in the Byzantine Empire, they were at a low ebb. Their navy was in no state to defeat the Venetians, for example.
Okay.
Now, in July 1203, what the Venetians managed to do is they breach the Golden Horn. That's the kind of deep water sea harbour, which is on the northern side of the capital. There was a massive sea chain which had been built to stop ships sailing in there. The Byzantines didn't want to. The Venetians managed to breach it, and the Crusader army lands at Galata, which is a kind of town on the north facing Constantinople across the Golden Horn, across this body of water. So the Crusaders are here in Galata, looking at Constantinople, looking at the northern sea walls, the northern edge of the city. And on the 17th of July, they managed to get a foothold on these northern sea walls. They land, they kind of carry out an amphibious assault, and what they do is, to prevent a counterattack to destroy their bridgehead, they set a fire. They set a fire to defend their bridgehead and to kind of distract the Byzantines.
Right.
But the fire soon spreads out of control. And it destroys about 120 acres of Constantinople.
Oh, boy.
So it's a huge fire. Now, given that obviously the city's in a state of collapse, Alexios the Third decides to flee. He was criticised by Byzantine chroniclers at the time. One of them writes he was driven away by no one, because clearly they hadn't lost yet, but basically the emperor loses a nerve, flees. Now, what the Byzantine establishment... Did you want to say something, sorry?
Oh, I was just going to say, well, I mean, this just kind of opens the door for Alexios to just move in, doesn't it? I mean, if the emperor has just decided to up and leave.
Well, yeah, it should. So the young Alexios, who's going to be Alexios the Fourth, should just be able to walk in. There we go. Problem solved. But the Byzantine elite are not particularly keen on this guy who's clearly done a deal with the enemy on becoming their emperor. So they release the old blind Isaac the Second, who is, after all, the young Alexios' dad, and proclaim him emperor. So this is a bit of a problem for the Crusaders, because the illegitimate emperor, as they would see it, is now back on the throne, but that emperor hasn't signed any deals with them.
Oh, right. That's...
So what happens is, young Alexios is crowned co-emperor with his father on the 1st of August, 1203. So you have this uneasy situation where you've got Isaac the Second and Alexios the Fourth, father and son, on the throne. And I would say uneasy is this very much how you would sum up the next 6 months or so. Alexios' first act, Alexios the Fourth, his first act, now that he's been put on the throne by the Westerners, is to pay them. So he gives the Venetians 50,000 marks for, their services of sailing them there and capturing the city. He gives the Crusaders, do you remember those 34,000 marks they still owed the Venetians? That debt?
Yeah.
He gives that to the Crusaders, which they obviously then have to pay to the Venetians.
Yeah.
And he also gives the Crusaders a further 16,000 marks to cover other debts they've accrued in the meantime. Because keeping an army going is expensive business. But of course, the vast majority of that money had been lent by the Venetians, so almost all of the total 100,000 marks goes straight to the Venetians. So he's, pretty much taken the finances, the treasury of the country he's just inherited.
And just essentially bankrupting himself to pay off the people that helped him. I mean, I'm sure that did wonders for the economy.
Yeah, I mean, we said how 85,000 marks, the initial bill from the Treaty of Venice, was an astronomical sum. Now he's just given away 100,000 marks.
So I'm sure that makes him immensely popular with the people of Constantinople.
Exactly. The Byzantines, the Greeks, were not enamored at all with their new emperor. And by the way, his father is old, weak, and blind. So really, Alexios the Third, Alexios the Fourth is the one running the show. But he realizes he's got no support. He's come here with a foreign army, stormed the city. Half of it's burnt down. He is handing over all the Greeks' gold.
This is chaos. This isn't even worth it.
He's got no power base. And, if the Crusaders, as promised, are about to leave to Egypt, that was the whole deal.
Yeah.
Help me take Constantinople, put me on the throne, then you can get on your way with my help and support. Well, if that big crusading army leaves...
He's got no friends left.
Exactly. So Alexios, what he then does is he basically goes to the Crusaders and says, look, will you stay here at Constantinople until March next year, March 1204, in order to basically secure my position, and then you can go to Egypt.
What do the Crusaders say?
Well, given this is the third time, is it, that people have said then you can go to Egypt?
Yeah, they're raring to get going, and they probably wouldn't be too happy I'm getting the feeling that some of them at this point in time are beginning to suspect that they're basically just being used as pawns.
Well, I think the Crusade leadership realised they couldn't just get away with agreeing to this. So they
Yeah.
called a parliament, if you like, of the army, called together like representatives of the men,
Mm.
and basically tried to convince them to go along with this deal. The parliament was only won over when Alexios promised that he would pay the Venetian fleet as well to stay here until next spring, so that
Right.
they could then go to Egypt. So he was going to pay the Crusaders to stay, pay the Venetian fleet to stay. Again, more money.
Where is he getting all this money from?
For about, what's this, about 6, 7 months. And then you can go. And then, of course, once he's secured the support of the Crusaders, he sets off with Boniface on a tour of the provinces to ensure they're loyal to the new emperor.
Right.
But that leaves the Crusaders just hanging around at Galata at their camp. Now, these are kind of, they've still not done any crusading yet. They've still not fought any Arabs or Muslims.
Yeah, the only people they fought so far are Christians.
Exactly. And unrest grows. Some unruly Crusaders decide to attack a mosque on the Golden Horn in Constantinople because, Constantinople was a metropolis. It was a huge city of maybe up to 500,000 people.
It's very multicultural.
Yeah, and it's part of the Byzantine Empire, which covered at various times large parts of the Near East. So it has Slavs. It's obviously mostly Greek and Greek-speaking and Greek Orthodox, but it has people from the Balkans. It has people from Asia Minor. It has Armenians, and it has some Muslim population. Now, the Crusaders are not used to having Muslims in their midst, and they are obviously the holy enemy, and they attack this mosque. Now, basically, a fight breaks out between the populace, the locals, and the Crusaders who are attacking property. And in order to protect themselves, the Crusaders start a fire.
Oh, boy.
To basically ward off the mob. And they set fire to the mosque and its surrounding buildings. And this fire spreads. There's a northerly wind, and it basically cuts a swathe from north to south, all the way through the city, from the Golden Horn, the north coast, through to the Sea of Marmara, which is the south coast. And it's utterly, utterly devastating. It destroys about 440 acres of densely populated central Constantinople.
Jeez, that's even worse than the last fire. And you thought that was bad.
It is. It's totally devastating. So what do you think the attitude of the Greek populace is to their new co-residents and their emperor who's been put there by these Latins?
Well, this was I just like that this is supposed to be uniting the East and Western churches. And so far, really all that's managed to happen is just more unrest has come about, and this is no exception.
I mean, this is probably like our third major friendly fire incident, if we want to term it like that, which I guess we are. So Zara, and then attacking Constantinople and starting a big fire, and then starting another even bigger fire.
Yeah.
So all the victims so far of this crusade are Christian, and they are devastating, like we've said before, the greatest city in the Christian world.
Yeah. I mean, so what is Alexios doing at this point in time? Does he ever kind of say, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, definitely. By winter of 1202-3 was bad. Winter of 1203-4 is probably worse. Alexios runs out of money in November, even though he's supposed to be keeping them here till March. Meanwhile, the Greek populace are increasingly rioting because money is being ruthlessly stripped from them through taxes, stuff being stripped from churches to try and pay these Westerners who they hate and they wish would go. So Alexios is in an even worse position, and his rule descends into drunkenness and just horseplay and messing about with these Westerners in Galata. The Crusaders in Galata, their camp is increasingly like basically a fortress in hostile territory with very much a hostile populace around them.
Yeah.
Alexios needs more money to pay the Crusaders, to keep him in power in the short term, but to take more money, threatens his crown in the long term. So what's going to happen? Well, inevitably, Alexios's reign is not going to last.
Yeah, I could see that happening.
What happens is that the son-in-law of Alexios the Third, the deposed emperor, leads a dissident faction who overthrow Alexios the Fourth.
Right.
And just to make things easy, this dissident leader is called Alexios Ducas. He's from the Ducas clan, which was married into the Komnenoi clan, so he's also related to the imperial family. But he's also called Alexios, so we now have Alexios the Fifth on the night of 28th of January, 1204. Alexios the Fourth is arrested. His father's arrested again. Poor Isaac. Asked for any of this to happen. And Alexios the Fifth is proclaimed emperor.
Now, I'm sure that this probably wasn't taken with great enthusiasm by the Crusaders, because Alexios V doesn't have any financial obligations to the Crusaders.
Absolutely. The Crusaders basically say to Alexios V, we were expecting that you will stick to the terms of the deal that we did with Alexios IV. So uniting the churches, supporting our expedition, all that sort of thing. Yeah, Alexios V is like, no.
Yeah.
Why would I agree to any of these things? And the final break between the Crusaders and the Byzantine leadership comes on the 8th of February when Alexios IV is murdered.
Oh.
So the Crusaders can't even kind of like try and reinstall him on the throne.
Yeah, they're not getting their money.
Exactly. Well, there is one way they could get their money.
I don't like where this is going.
In fairness to the Crusaders, they were now in a very bleak position. They are trapped in what is essentially hostile territory.
Yeah.
They can't just really sail away because their ships probably a lot of them are in need of refit and repair, but they can't access the harbour. They've got no supplies or money. The deal they've done, which is supposed to be, at least on the surface have some Christian purposes, some Crusader purposes, is now dead in the water. So they find themselves in this impossible situation that, in fairness, I would say they've got themselves in through making very bad choices. So in March 1204, the different leaders of the Crusade and the Doge of Venice get together and agree something called the March Pact. Basically, they agree their way out of this crisis is they are going to storm and capture for themselves Constantinople.
Okay, tall order, but I mean, that's I still can't get over. This is this is a Christian city.
Yeah,
these are Christians.
Yeah,
and the goal of this whole thing was to help unite. I mean, I guess conquering and then making your own empire is one way of uniting, but it was supposed to unite the two churches, not just make it all one.
Yes. So, given I think probably the state Constantinople was in after a year of fires and sieges, they were pretty confident of taking it, and they agreed. One of the things of the March Pact was they agreed the loot of the capital, the spoils of taking the city. The first 200,000 marks will go to the Venetians, because of course, and the rest will be divided equally between the Venetians and the Crusade leaders. They also agreed a committee of 12 would then select a new emperor of what would be a Latin Western Christian
Right.
empire at Constantinople. They also agreed in this March Pact of 1204 that in March 1205 they would then leave for Egypt.
This is where it all started. This is it was just, we got to get to Egypt, and they still got that vision, which I guess in a way I can respect. Good on you for sticking to it. But oh boy,
I know. So, 9th of April 1204, the Crusader assault begins, a big amphibious assault on the northern sea walls across the Golden Horn from Galata. And the decisive breakthrough after much bloody, difficult fighting is made on the 12th of April. They breach the northern sea walls, they establish a bridgehead and take control of a portion of northern Constantinople, murdering soldier and civilian without distinction. In order to prevent a Byzantine counterattack, they set a fire.
Another one.
And this third fire destroys whatever's left of the city and the parts that have been rebuilt in the last, months.
Oh my god.
So that night of 12th, 13th of April, Alexios the Fifth, the new emperor, flees the city, realizing that all is lost. So on the 13th, the Crusaders take control.
Wow.
I know. And what follows is centralized, systematic plundering and looting and sacking of the greater city in the Christian world, because in accordance with the March Pact, they've got to basically loot the spoils to finance the Venetians and to finance a future expedition to Egypt. Timon describes it as an orgy of looting, the thoroughness and lack of finesse of which appalled most of those who heard of it. This is a city full of Christian relics, full of, as I said, relics from the ancient world, of Greece and Rome, that were, even at that time, over 1,000 years old, some of them. And the place is trashed, if it hadn't already been trashed by the fires. Apparently the Emperor Justinian, a great kind of Roman or early Byzantine empire of the 500s, the 6th century, his tomb was opened and his body, which was apparently well preserved, it had been embalmed like Egyptian pharaohs, was just thrown out onto the street.
Oh my god.
As a historian, there are so many things that were lost, both ancient Roman and Greek, as well as Byzantine art, architecture, and libraries. Ancient texts of the greats of Greek and Roman literature were destroyed that we probably no longer have.
Yeah, I mean, and think about the history, the architecture of the city itself being burnt in all the fires. It's such a shame for all that to just kind of be lost in what, a matter of days.
And lost for such avoidable and pointless reasons. Lost not to some sort of foreign invader, but to, well, it was a foreign invader, but to a crusade that was, and as we kind of talked about in our first episode, the whole point of the First Crusade was to save and protect the Byzantine Empire.
And now it's ended.
Bridge in the 100 years.
Yeah.
They've destroyed it. After the looting was officially called off on the 15th of April, the official treasury, the money and goods and valuables that had been stripped from palaces and houses and churches, was apparently 300,000 marks. And that's the official. That's not stuff. Imagine soldiers have pocketed stuff and hidden stuff for themselves. That's what they've handed over to the Crusader leaders. 300,000 marks worth of goods and valuables, and obviously sheer cash and gold. The total, Timon estimates that was probably less than half the total goods plundered, because, like I say, individual soldiers
Yeah.
and leaders would have pocketed huge amounts themselves. I know we've been a bit shaky on what those figures would look like today. It is very difficult, but Timon says that sort of sum, we're talking 500, 600,000 marks, would have funded a European state for about a decade at that time.
Right.
So let's say today, what would a state spend? Probably hundreds of billions in a year,
Yeah.
I think, roughly. So this is 10 years worth. So this is trillions and trillions we're talking.
That's a lot of money. And
do they go to Egypt?
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. It's a lot of money, and it all basically is just getting spent immediately on debt to pay off things, to pay off just things that they've already, gotten themselves into in the past 2 years. And yeah, do they go to Egypt? Do they actually really manage to get anything that they originally set off to do done?
No. Pope Innocent is absolutely horrified when he hears of the final result of his vision for a crusade.
I would be too.
For him, and the consequences are, well, the Crusaders tried to establish basically Latin Western Christian states, 4 main states. Six states plus a variety of minor lordships, and the Venetians taken a load of territory and colonies within what used to be the Byzantine Empire. The chief ones were the Latin Empire of Constantinople, of which Baldwin made himself emperor, or was selected by the Crusaders as emperor, and Boniface, our crusade leader, makes himself the king of Thessalonica, which was the second biggest city in the empire in northern Greece. But these states are, if the states of the Crusader states out in the Holy Land had it tough, because, they'd never had enough Western manpower and things like that, surrounded by enemies, it was even worse for these new Latin states in the former Byzantine Empire, because there was even less Westerners interested in going out to fight and support these states, which a lot of people, I think, would be more ashamed of than anything else. And Boniface, for example, didn't get to be king of Thessalonica very long. He was killed fighting the Bulgarians in 1207. His kingdom was destroyed by the Greeks in 1224. There was actually 3 Greek successor states to the Byzantine Empire. The Despotate of Epiros in northwestern Greece. The Empire of Trebizond in what was called then Pontus in northern Asia Minor. And the Empire of Nicaea, set up in western Anatolia, western Asia Minor, which succeeded in establishing itself basically as like the Byzantine Empire in exile, and tried to carry on at least all the traditions and structure and religious institutions and bureaucracy of the Byzantine Empire. And all 3, incidentally, of these successor states were set up by people related to the Komnenos imperial clan.
Yeah.
So that problem continued.
Hmm.
The Latin Empire of Constantinople, the one sole achievement of this disastrous friendly fire incident, was a pathetic state that very soon, with setbacks from both the Bulgarians and the Empire of Nicaea, found itself limited to basically just the city of Constantinople itself.
Yeah.
But that city never recovered fully to its heyday. You can understand why, really, after what we've talked about. It had been robbed of all its valuables. It had been trashed. It had been so severely damaged that it never again was anything like the kind of great metropolis that it had been. And it actually fell to the Emperor of Nicaea by accident in July 1261, while the Latin Emperor was out with his army campaigning, and the Nicaeans were let in a side gate, leaving the Latin emperor without an empire. And Nicaea became the Byzantine Empire, I guess, ruling from Constantinople again from 1261 to its destruction in the 1400s. But once again, it was never the great power of the Near East that it had been, the great Christian Roman state.
Yeah.
That it had been in the late antiquity and in the medieval times. The power of the Byzantine Empire had been thoroughly smashed by the Fourth Crusade.
Yeah, the Fourth Crusade kind of, I mean, you could say it, weakened the Byzantine Empire enough to the point where, the Ottomans could just take Constantinople. And,
yes.
It led directly to the downfall of the Byzantine Empire and the whole face of the Middle East as a result of this. And so, one question.
The Middle East to Christianity's detriment, it must be said.
Yes, certainly. So, one more question, one final question about the Fourth Crusade. So they never made it to Jerusalem. No one did?
No, I mean, groups of crusaders left for the Holy Land to try and fulfill their oath.
Hmm.
And as I've said, groups had split off at Zara, at Corfu, and some of them had gone on to do that. But no, the Crusader host as a whole and the leaders that we've talked about all the way through never went to fulfill their oath.
Wow. Wasn't even worth it.
No, it was one great big friendly fire incident that was driven by poor decision making, by, I would say, not a little bit of Venetian malevolence.
Yeah.
Although at the same time they had a huge bill that they had to try and get, payment for building the fleet. And by the, all the kind of parts of crusading about, it being holy war, about it being directed by the papacy, by the Pope, were really just thrown out the window. One of the unique features of this crusade is that there was no ecclesiastical, no church leadership. Because the Crusaders were excommunicated when they attacked Zara, the papal legate, the Pope's representative who'd been with them, had left.
Right.
So from then on, the church had no real say in the decision making. And the Pope was powerless. The only thing he could have done is called the crusade off, but that, like we've said, is a huge embarrassment for him.
Yeah.
And he, again, a failure on his part, really, to take that final drastic step of cancelling a crusade midway through. And all these factors, the lack of church leadership, the desperate need for money, the Venetians, of course, Alexios the Fourth himself, and his actions resulted in this disastrous friendly fire incident for Christianity.
Wow. That history's worst friendly fire incident. It has to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to take, I don't know friendly fire incidents in terms of raw casualties, and maybe this wouldn't be, but if you think about the total deaths in Zara and then in Constantinople from the 2 sieges and the 3 massive fires, it's probably going to be up there, surely.
Yeah. And, think about the ideological friendly fire,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's so much lost there. And, I mean, I just find it bizarre how it's all done in the name of of Christianity. I mean, more than anything, this was just a diversion. You know, it's just one thing piling on top of on another, and it's like, we got to get these bills paid. We got to get these bills paid. Okay, time to time to take Constantinople.
Yeah, at some point, as much as the bills were there to be paid, someone just needed to step back and say, "Hang on, what are we doing?
What are we doing?"
Got to pay the bills, attack Zara. Got to pay the bills, put this usurper on the Byzantine throne. Got to pay the bills, let's destroy Constantinople.
It's a graduation into insanity. Oh my god. Well, that's the Fourth Crusade, history's worst friendly fire incident.
Absolutely. I mean, if our listeners have got other good examples of terrible friendly fire incidents, perhaps just as many poor decisions made or cataclysmic mistakes, let us know.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. I'm just trying to think in my own mind, if I can think of anything. I mean, there's a few things, but I don't know if there's anything quite as bad as this. Like we say, think about it on the terms of how this has affected history. I don't know. You'd be hard pressed, but
You would be.
I welcome anyone who can think of anything. I'd love to hear it.
Did you have a suggestion of one that maybe wasn't quite as bad, but was certainly worthy of retelling?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do have another friendly fire incident. Now, this is proper history's most stuff. In fact, I think this is one of the stories that actually, thinking about it, we kind of wanted to start history's most on. This was one of
the idea.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, this is going to be ridiculous. So, for context, this is during the Austro-Turkish War of 1787 to 1791. The Austrian army are scouting for forces of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the army is about 100,000 strong. So the army of Austria is about 100,000 strong. So it's quite big. You have.
And this was the Habsburg Austrian Empire, right? So it's multi-ethnic.
Yes, it's that is. Thank you for reminding me, because that's very important. Should we? Sometime in the future, history's worst empire.
Yeah. I mean, in our interview, episode 11, talking about the Holy Roman Empire, I mean, this technically is the Holy Roman Empire, isn't it? In its 18th century form.
Yeah. So there you go. It's a continuation of a pretty bad empire already. But so yes, the Austro army is basically divided into a bunch of different nationalities and ethnicities, a lot of which don't speak the same language. There's a lot of confusion about that. That will be a running theme in the Austrian army well into World War One. But anyway, so a contingent of hussars, is that how it's pronounced? Hussars,
yeah.
Hussars. They're looking around for the Ottoman army, and they didn't find any people. They didn't find any Ottomans, but they did find a group of Romani people who offered to sell schnapps to the weary soldiers. The cavalrymen.
Okay. Sounds nice.
Yeah, the cavalrymen, they bought the schnapps and started to drink. So, I don't know if you remember a Christmas episode, but
yeah, the same thing here. We've got soldiers drinking.
Yeah. The now, as time goes on, the infantry are finally starting to cross this river, where the cavalrymen are drinking. They've met up with them. They saw the party happening and started demanding some alcohol for themselves.
Naturally, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, as you would. And instead, the cavalrymen decided, no, you're not getting any schnapps. And while still drunk, set up makeshift fortifications around the barrels. A heated argument ensued, and one soldier fired a shot.
Oh dear.
So, now, I don't know, maybe if this is any more competent army, this is when they'd kind of say, okay, everybody calm down, we gotta stop. Instead, the hussars and infantry engaged in combat with each other. They started actually just fighting each other.
This has gone too far now.
Yeah.
This has gone further than the eggnog incident.
Yes. During the conflict, some infantry began shouting Turchi, I suppose that's how it's pronounced, which means Turks. So, despite there not being any Turks, they have believed that there are Turks, when in reality it's just the army. It's just the army.
So there's firing going on, there's people shooting each other, and people begin to think this is the enemy army approaching.
Yeah.
Which is understandable. It's more likely than some soldiers bought some schnapps, set up fortifications, and ended up shooting at their own comrades to stop them getting any schnapps.
Yeah, so you start hearing gunshots, and especially when no one can understand each other, because this is what it says here. The army comprised of Austrians, Serbs, Croats, and Italians from Lombardy, plus other minorities, many of whom could not understand each other. It'd be pretty hard to kind of rationalize what's going on, especially when you can't understand the people next to you. So, this is one of my favorite ones. The situation was made worse when officers, in an attempt to restore order, shouted "Halt! Halt!", which was misheard by soldiers with no knowledge of German as "Allah! Allah!".
Halt in German.
Halt.
Allah.
Allah. I don't
maybe
know.
If you're scared and confused and running and catch half of it.
Yeah.
Amidst the sounds of battle.
I guess, yeah, I suppose. More things, it just gets worse and worse. Corps commander thought it was a cavalry charge and started ordering artillery fire. The whole army basically awoke to battle, and rather than waiting to see what the situation was, everyone just fled. Everyone ran away. They started shooting at everything, thinking that it was just Ottomans, and they were shooting their own men. They were shooting people of their own army, and the whole army actually retreated from nothing. They were fighting each other. No one knew what was going on. This is
to withdraw from an imagined enemy.
Yes, this is my favorite part here. It's just added as a little aside here. Holy Roman Emperor Joseph the Second was pushed off his horse into a small creek. So that's nice. 2 days later, the Ottoman army made it to Karansevich, and they probably quite confused as to what's going on.
They'd be very confused finding this abandoned camp.
Yeah.
With potentially hundreds of casualties, and thinking, wait, who's done this?
Yeah. They took the city. They took Karansevich, and that's basically the end of that story. Now, we're not quite sure on the level of deaths.
Mm-hmm.
I think the highest number, which is the one that I was originally told, and I mean, I don't know whether to dispute it or not, is 10,000 casualties.
Does seem a lot considering it was a battle against no one.
Yeah. So that may not be entirely true, but I don't know what the, there aren't any official figures for this. Everything pretty much is up to conjecture. But either way, it's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably understandable that the Habsburgs didn't detail and account this incident in particularly well. It's
Yeah.
not been recorded officially in the war diary.
Yeah. I'm not particularly surprised that they wouldn't want to really mark this one down as their proudest moment.
Apparently, as well as potentially hundreds of losses, they also, because they abandoned the camp in such a hurry, left a chest which contained the army's payroll.
Oh.
All the money meant to pay the army.
Quick, sack Constantinople.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, that actually was probably their aim, fighting the Ottomans. But yeah, that certainly is a more, I would say, a more entertaining,
It's
friendly fire incident.
Yeah, I mean, it's tragic. Don't get me wrong, but man, it's it is tragedy plus. I mean, what is it again? Tragedy.
Tragedy plus time equals comedy. That
Yes.
famous formula.
Yeah, which we've kind of applied to our to our podcast.
Quite a few occasions, yes.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's one of the stories that kind of helped inspire this podcast. Finally told. And originally that was going to be, I don't know how that was going to be a full episode originally, but we've kind of we've kind of managed to mellow out as time has gone on. But yes, those are two pretty damn bad friendly fire incidents from history.
Absolutely,
one,
in their own ways.
Yeah, well, one is more immediately bad. The other takes a little bit of time. They're still pretty bad, both.
Absolutely, and I think it's fitting that episode 13 is two calamitous incidents.
Good point. Very good point. Well, with that said, drop us a line if you think you may have like a more horrible, horrific friendly fire incident from history at histories.most@gmail.com. That's histories without an apostrophe. And we're also on Twitter. And
follow us on Twitter.
If you could leave a review on Podchaser as well, or wherever you get your podcasts, if you could rate us there or leave a little review, we'd appreciate that as well.
Absolutely, would mean a lot.
And thank you for listening. Well, with that being said, I've been Peter.
And I've been Alex, and thank you for listening to History's Most.